The CMO Confidential podcast is a proud member of the I Hear Everything podcast network. Looking to launch or scale your podcast? I Hear Everything delivers podcast production, growth, and monetization solutions that transform your words into profit. Ready to give your brand a voice? Then visit iheareverything.com.
Welcome to CMO Confidential, the podcast that takes you inside the drama, decisions, and choices that go with being the head of marketing. Hosted by five-time CMO Mike Linton.
Welcome, marketers, advertisers, and those who love them to Chief Marketing Officer Confidential. CMO Confidential is a program that takes you inside the drama, the decisions, and the politics that go with being the head of marketing at any company in what is one of the most scrutinized jobs in the executive suite. I'm Mike Linton, the former Chief Marketing Officer of Best Buy, eBay, Farmers Insurance, and Ancestry.com, here today with my guest, Jason Radisson. Today's topic, new CMOs at the inflection point, tips for the hard situations. Now, Jason is the founder and CEO of Movo, the mobile productivity platform for frontline teams. I almost got that out without messing it up. Before starting Movo, Jason held executive positions for a number of companies, including Uber, Caesars, Rappi, and Avira. He was also a consultant at McKinsey and Accenture and refers to himself as a fixer, which we will talk about later. Full disclosure, our paths crossed at eBay. Welcome, Jason.
Mike, thanks for having me on the show.
Of course. Now, Jason, you are particularly focused, and we're super interested in talking about what you called inflection points. Tell us what you mean by inflection points and how it pertains to companies.
Yeah, so strictly speaking, inflection points are things like a company facing technological obsolescence, a change of control. Maybe it's a turnaround, something's broken in operations and the company's really struggling to execute. Any of these kinds of turning points in the company's trajectory and history, and oftentimes where CMOs or people who are doing roles like CMOs, things like chief digital officers, are brought in with great expectations about fixing everything.
Yeah, so these inflection points almost always, we're going to talk about it in a minute, but it almost always means something's gone sideways. And then you're going to throw usually a new CMO into that mix. Let's talk about the difference in that mix of being a new CMO or an established CMO already, where the company says, gosh, Jason, we have to pivot everything. Let's start talking about how you even manage the expectations the company gives you at the inflection point. And let me just start a little bit. Well, the company will say, oh my gosh, we're going to pivot completely. We got to do this, or this is a problem, or we're putting in this new product line. How do you, as a CMO, even assess the expectations the company is giving you in that? And then what do you do about reframing them?
I think you've got to fact and sanity check the vision and whatever those, top sort of midterm expectations are, what you're supposed to accomplish in the first couple of quarters, what you're supposed to accomplish in the first couple of years. Sanity check those. I think it's very important to do the math and actually understand that the levers exist and how the levers relate to that overall business case. Is the case even valid? If that's a halfway decent and valid case, then you have to do a gap analysis, and you got to compare what's the team I have, what's the technology I have, what's the product I have, what's the budget I have, and where we're supposed to go, and build based on that gap analysis the plan. And the plan comes down to the things I just mentioned, and in the right quantities, in the right order to get you where you need to go. So I think that's the first step.
So I agree with you on the math, but that's a lot of math, often in a really short period of time, where the company's running out, and sometimes where the math may not be available. How do you get the math and get it enough at speed? And then we'll talk about a follow-on question. And what if the math says the vision is wrong? So there's a whole bunch of questions in here. You can unwrap them in order. But the first is, how do you get the math at speed if it's not always available?
Yeah, I think math at speed some of it will be available. Some of the data will be available. There are a lot of just public sources. Hopefully you're well-versed, or you've got access to people who are well-versed at sort of getting things like, traffic data, product data within the company, those kinds of things. To give a couple of kind of public examples.
Examples would be great. Knock yourself out.
You've got to be an expert at getting the data together that you need to validate. So if it is financial, then having the relationship, building a quick relationship with a CFO, or maybe it's a head of FP&A, whoever it is that you need to get at the data that you need. What I like to do, and what I think is most effective in these early days of planning, is also having it's part of your onboarding networking anyway. You're going to have lunch with people. You have specific questions. You can prepare for those lunches essentially with interview guides. You don't have to lay an interview guide on them. But it's an old consulting trick to sort of go into the lunch with the 3 or 4 bits of data that you need and get a commitment. If you can't get the data in the lunch or in that first coffee meeting with that new colleague, get the commitment to get that data together. And I think also it's an iterative planning process. So, the same kinds of things apply in management consulting. Like, you kind of need to have a first week hypothesis. Here's what I think the plan is. Here's where I think it works. Here's where I think there are weaknesses. As you get into the second week and data starts to flow from the people that you've been meeting as you kind of get ramped up in the company, you've already got a pretty robust data set, and you should be well on your way to figuring out whether or not the company has overall a decent strategic plan. I think it's incumbent on every C-suite executive to validate the company's plan as you onboard, by the way.
I agree with that. I agree with that. What if, and then I want to finish this with, if you can go back in your career and give us an example. If you start doing the math and the early math says, oh my gosh, this vision is a train wreck. We're going to be like running off the cliff with this vision. But the company and the board are already way down the road on this, and you're sitting there as the CMO. What do you do then?
Yeah, you specifically have to renegotiate at that point. I would, and you don't need to do it exactly at the point that you've sort of have the aha moment that, our overall strategic plan has a bunch of weaknesses that I feel uncomfortable with. But at least the ones that pertain to what you're going to do in your marketing role with your revenue responsibilities, you need to make sure that you're in a position to really be able to debunk them. The next step, as I said, is go back to the gap analysis. Okay, given what I have, because you're only going to have so much political capital to be able to sort of renegotiate and reset expectations. I strongly recommend doing it after you have the gap analysis. So one thing is,
you can't just throw up your hands, go, oh my God.
You can't just say,
and then they say, how do you think about it? I feel it's bad. You got to have math. But can you give us an example? You don't even have to name the company, but if you want to, it's okay. Where you've gone in and looked at the math and said, oh my gosh, the strategy, this isn't going to work very well for anybody.
Yeah. Ride sharing and delivery, a lot of the businesses that I've worked in recently, as in the last 10 years or so, what is often, because those companies do something called vector-based planning. So they don't, strictly have a growth sort of target that's next year is going to be a little bit better than this year. They say, here is a vector of what a good region, a good country looks like in week 10 of being up and running, in week 100 being up and running, and so on. So a lot of times,
like micro math for a geography or a product line.
It's a growth curve, and I think there's a lot. Growth is a position in place of like CMO, right? Chief Growth Officer. This kind of title's thrown around a lot. In sort of unicorn hyper growth mode, the vector of how quickly you're going to grow the company is the key vector. And that vector, the way it's done, it's usually based in fact. Like, there was another country that did it this well. So part of the plan evaluation in that example is pretty easy. You look at that vector and you go, what made that market is actually known. Those were facts from a year ago when that team did it. Do those facts exist in our world? And you can pretty quickly validate sort of the inputs to that and figure out whether or not the growth objectives of the company make sense or not. So that is just a concrete example from tech that,
but let me keep going on this
example
example, because I think this was probably a great illustrative point for what we're talking about, which is if I'm doing vector-based planning and I think all countries are equal, I would say, look, we grew, at 100% rate year over year in England, and we grew 100% rate year over year in Canada. Therefore, we should go 100% year over year in Bulgaria or Moldova.
Exactly.
Or wherever. And when you go to the math tables, what you might say is, well, let's hang on a minute. And because the economy is the consumer, the amount of cars, all kinds of stuff might be at play here. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It could be regulatory environment. It could be the structure of the market. If you take the gig economy likes income disparity. It does really well in congested areas with a wealthy urban population and a relatively poor rural population that is relatively underemployed. Like that's the perfect scenario for a gig
you got to have a labor pool, and you got to have the labor pool wants to get work. Yeah,
exactly.
And then you have people that can pay the labor pool. Yeah.
Exactly, and that doesn't apply to Poughkeepsie in the way it applies to São Paulo. So there are all kinds of assumptions like that you can pretty quickly, the key ones are there. It is, some of the things that we were just talking about and maybe 10 other things. The whole point, it takes like a day to do this. This isn't rocket science. It's spreadsheet math and a little bit of investigation to kind of figure out what you have in your hands, if you didn't do that already in the interviewing process.
What I have to say is there's also an element here that we've talked about in a lot of other shows for marketers, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, is the marketer has to understand the business variables, not just the marketing variables. Because if I am marketing against, and I'm not aware of the regulation in my way or this other stuff in the way, I am going to spend a lot of money trying to make a market move that doesn't want to move. So when we're talking about the general manager, this should be easy math. When we're talking about the marketer, if you're in tune with the business, this is easy math. If you are not, and you're only looking at the effects of your marketing, you could go down the wrong road here. Is that right or wrong?
Yeah, 100%. And we only spoke about top line. Now, of course, the other part of that is at what cost are you getting that top line? How efficient are you? So, I think of it, roughly as these two vectors, the revenue vector, the cost of marketing vector, if you want to think about it as a percentage of revenue. And how well you understand what's underneath that. Hopefully you've been boning up. You've had, a few weeks before taking the job. You come in knowing most of that, and really what you're doing is kind of validating it internally.
Yeah. Got it. Now, let's while we're talking about how you reset expectations, we can go back to when people just roll over the expectations, which then you really got to think through how you're going to do the job. But we talked about you being the fixer. What is a fixer? Other than there's been a lot of shows on fixers, and I'm not sure you're that kind of fixer. But
right.
I mean, TV shows on fixers. So talk about being the fixer and how you fix things.
So I think, the situation where a lot of folks are coming into a new role, and, as you said at the beginning of the show, you might have more or less experience as you jump into this. You're in this new role. The company is jammed up for one reason or another, strategic or executionally. So you have to get in and you kind of have to unstick things. And the key is, in a first step, putting that plan down that is reasonable for those first couple of months. So there's a little bit of the process. You'll have a honeymoon. It may be very short. It may be a week or two. Hopefully you've got a month or a month and a half. But within that time, you should be out there within a month, within 6 weeks, you should definitely be out there with the plan. And the plan doesn't need to be in fast moving businesses that are, experiencing challenges. The plan should be with a reasonable horizon, next couple of quarters out initially, and just get people executing on what you need them to be executing on. So, the fixer is the person that comes in and does the diagnostic and gets that new plan in place, and then starts mobilizing the troops to go execute on that new plan.
Got
And
it.
the shorter and the cleaner and the greater the ROI of that work is sort of what I would say are the three kind of key metrics of what's a good fixer.
So if I summarize what you just said, diagnose the problem or the plan,
Mm-hmm.
put some early wins in there, and then show momentum while you're communicating it to the company. Is that fair?
Yeah, very much.
So when you're looking at this fixing thing, you can identify the problem as a number of things: sales, structure, talent, technology, something else. How do you rally the company around a problem? Because my experience has been usually the company either knows of the problem and has put it behind an electric fence and doesn't really want to talk about it. It's going to just say, hey, market your way around this, or that's not really the problem, or we just got to convince consumers our value prop is better. Just tell them we're better.
Right.
How do you actually rally the company around the problem, especially if it's different than what they think it is?
Yeah, the best way to rally the company is to validate it out there and put points on the board. You can talk until you're blue in the face about the gaps and about the problem. It's really starting to act on the solution that I think is the heart of all good change, successful change. So getting out there as quickly as possible in the market with whatever your solution is. On the solution itself, what I've sort of, and I think we're overall in this evolution where, the traditional marketing role is now becoming more and more of like a supply chain job, where you've got all of these different channels, you've got to run them super efficiently. There's a lot more just kind of math and tech involved. I think in each of those channels, in each of the opportunities on the organic side, on CRM, on your SEO, on all of your different programs, there's kind of an optimum, and you should know it. And if you get into the company and, the company doesn't have a strong thesis about how to make Google work for it, or, paid or SEO, or, doesn't have a strong thesis about which CRM campaigns actually work and why, those are the kinds of things that, are going to be part of that initial plan. Because, right after you come back with, here's sort of the 2 or 3 things I want to focus on right out of the gate, the next step is, here's how we're going to be the best acquisition machine in our industry. Here's how we're going to plug our leaky buckets on the CRM side. You've got to then get into specific strategies. So that's that next step. But
I agree with this. And I can't let the supply chain job comment go without drilling down on the list.
Sorry.
No, this is the kind of thing what the show is about. So
Yep.
We're talking about marketers as actually not just doing just marketing or business, but as a supply chain job. Exactly what do you mean by that? And what makes a good supply chain marketer or a bad one?
Yeah. So what I mean by that is the skill set is a supply chain skill set. So if the goal is I have, $1 billion of marketing spend, or I have $100 million of marketing spend, and I must earn an ROI of X on that $100 million, it's a portfolio optimization job. Which is a typical supply chain job. I have 10 different suppliers I can buy hardware components from, or I have 10 different hardware components. I have 100 different suppliers now optimize. We have kind of a more limited set. There's only Google, there's only Facebook, there's only there's pretty strong
in performance marketing.
monopolies
If
there.
you have brand, you have influencers, you might have all this other stuff.
Yeah, you have all
but
right.
I hear the story.
Ultimately, they're a source of value to the company that you got to go build a relationship and optimize. So
I like it. Okay, so let's just drill down on one thing. Let's say sales are in decline, which is usually one of the reasons they're going to bring in a new marketer, or the brand has gotten tired, the product line is tired, competitors have passed you. How do you identify the real issue? Because a lot of times the company doesn't really know the real issue. And I know there's math here, but let's talk about if you can give us an example of how this might work. And then I want to talk about algorithmic shelf campaigns. But
yeah, totally.
This is all about sales and closing and CAC and all that other stuff.
Yeah. So I think, to begin with, there's the relationship between the chief sales officer and chief marketing officer. And, hopefully it's a robust relationship and everybody agrees on who owns what.
Yeah.
I think there's, there can be some organizational challenges there in sort of just defining that.
Yeah.
So I'll say that is the big long caveat. But
that is a huge caveat, because usually sales are down, sales hardly ever shows up and goes, we are really crappy at selling.
Right.
But we can't close worth beans.
And both could be true. The marketing could stink and the sales team could be really crappy at closing, right? So I think you have to parse it. And the funnel is a good way to parse it. And there, get some math together. How many are opportunities down? If anything, there's you could delineate kind of on the funnel and opportunities coming in versus close in the sales process and sales effectiveness. And I think from there you could start to open up the dialogue of like, here's how much marketing can bring to increase top line. Here's where we see opportunities on the sales side, and without punching the other guy or poking the other guy in the eye, at least having that conversation.
That's for the other fixer to do.
That's right. That's the sales fixer.
I want to make sure. Here's what I hear you saying, and it's tell me if I have this right, which is, look, so you're going to take apart the whole marketing and sales funnel, and then you're going to math each piece of it, and then you're going to say this is where we are actually losing as a company. Not where marketing sucks or sales sucks. It might be, look, we don't have enough leads. We can't close the leads we get. If I'm B2B, we get them in the office and we can't close them, or we go visit them and we can't close them. Let's really isolate the whole story. And sometimes the whole story may be across the entire marketing funnel, from acquisition to close to retention.
Could be.
But that's where you got to take it apart. Is that a good summary of what you just...
That's a great summary. And to reiterate, because I think it's...
Thank you for being on the show.
One of the most important points is the company should know which programs are working. So, it's what makes your job as a fixer super easy is if you jump in and the company's like, we have absolutely no idea which channel actually works for us.
And what percent of companies that you have interfaced with actually have no idea? Because my guess is it's a pretty big percentage.
Yeah, probably 20 or 30%.
That's a huge...
And then there's another 30% or so, maybe even 40 or 50% that says, we know one thing works, but we don't know what the next thing is.
Yeah, I agree.
We rock in TikTok. Like, we have the TikTok strategy. We're the most acquisitive consumer company in TikTok in the country. We know TikTok. Okay, but what else? That's more common.
Like you talked about in our pre-discussion, algorithmic shelf campaigns.
Yeah.
Tell us what algorithmic shelf means. I was thinking, it took me forever to pronounce that, but I was thinking, there's continental shelf, there's bookshelf, now there's algorithmic shelf.
Right.
Tell me about it.
Right. So it's an old Harrah's-ism. I worked for Gary Loveman back in the casino industry, back in the consolidation of that industry. And it was our internal name for our kind of core CRM programs that just produce money. So those are our shelf campaigns, because they're on the shelf in our world, any casino brand could run them. The algos were pre-calculated. So if you had something like you wanted to get a particular high opportunity segment from Midwestern neighborhoods to come into Las Vegas, that was a shelf campaign. And all you needed to do was run it. It was pre-calculated every night. It was always available to you.
I got it. And that was, at the time, the best loyalty program probably in the world. And that was where you could say, we understand that this segment values a free dinner or a show more than this segment, and we're going to send this to them. Or they value room upgrades better. Is that what I'm talking about?
Yeah, and the most important part of the algorithm was the calculation of upside potential. So, in a consumer company, the power to be able to know at any given point in time your wallet share with every one of your customers, right? And how big that wallet is this somebody that spends $10,000 a year on our category, but they're only spending $100 a year with us? That upside potential is what we spent our marketing money on. That's where we got the ROI. That's where the ROI is just completely off the charts. Versus all the stuff we've been in, right? Like it doesn't, you don't want to send offers to your most loyal customers who don't need it anyway, or are going to visit you in a high frequency pattern anyway. Those kinds of things. Those were the algos. And, I firmly believe what I have seen ever since that experience, and, I was responsible for database marketing back then. I had a whole portfolio of campaigns and analysts creating new campaigns and these kinds of things and working with the properties to get them out there. What I've seen since is every company has a few of these. They just don't know about them yet. I
agree. And we've done a number of shows on this, which is get your data in order. Like, if you have the data, you should always be gobbling up more data. But the other thing is get your data arranged in a way you can use it versus just collecting it.
True, exactly. And I think it's just a human tendency to hire more in an IT direction in some of these phases. And then it becomes a data exercise and somebody puts together a big data lake, and and that can take a year or two. You can get a lot more impact, a lot quicker if you work backwards from what you think those opporthere are.
Right, find an outcome and make sure.
Yeah, define an outcome
to get to an outcome. Yeah,
exactly. Define. Here are 3, 4, 5 things we think would really ring the cash register if we just knew how to do them, and then go find the data to run that particular campaign.
Got it. So while we're on it, let's talk about if tech is the problem, if data is the problem, if the data arrangement or array is the problem. How do you approach the company on that, particularly if you're the marketer? And what you're saying is, these tools, I can only see so much of their outcome because I'm blind, because the data is either not in our system or it's arranged terribly. What do I do?
I think that problem is really being mitigated more and more every day, every week. There are, and I'm sure there are edge cases. There are companies where it's just freaking impossible to get any data. I get it. But
where you get 3 to 4 different sets of data, depending on how you ask the question.
Yeah.
And that is the one that I think a lot of marketers run up against, is they will come in with data, and then sales might have their own data, and then finance might have another set of data. And you spend the first half of the meeting just aligning the data. And why all the data is getting better, sometimes the coordination of data is actually not in all companies getting better.
Yeah, very much so. The part that I think is getting better quickest is the part of instrumentation and the ability to sort of crunch data. Because you used to have to be a SaaS programmer or hire a SaaS programmer before it was a Python developer, before it was a Java developer, and depending on the scale of the data you were trying to get after. Now, and literally as of last week in particular, and we do a bunch of internal benchmarks, on the different Gen AI tools, but ChatGPT in the release of last week writes really clean sort of algorithm development quality Python code, straight shot, first shot in all of our kind of internal testing scripts. So, I think you're in this mode too, where, one thing is you got to get the instrumentation. So if nobody has thought to get that data from the mobile app, you've got to convince the mobile development team to instrument the app to get the key variable you need. But again, we're kind of working backwards from what are the data that we need to go get a program live in the market. And really sort of my emphasis would be more on that than getting, the sort of planning data sets and things. I think a lot of times it's more effective to just work with your FP&A partners to get sort of the planning data house in order and put in your request to the database team, and those variables will eventually come. If I'm ramping up and we've got to turn around this company, we got to do it in 4 or 6 weeks to put points on the board, I'm going to go straight to the engineering team and ask for a couple of variables so I can go get that campaign launched.
Yeah, I think it's a super thing. And a good way to move towards our last question, which is, look, focus on the outcome you have to have. Get the data aligned so you can see the problem clearly, solve the problem. So that brings us, we're just about out of time. We have a traditional last question. It's a two-parter. Funniest story you can tell on the air and or practical advice to marketers we haven't talked about yet. You can pick one or both, but you have to pick at least one. So knock yourself out.
I'll start with practical advice, since that's a little bit of where we're at. I think I would encourage anybody that's thinking about the marketing job, and it really depends a little bit on where you are in your career currently and how invested you are. I think in the skills that you've built already, the role is transforming so rapidly. I would encourage anyone sort of, let's say, in their 20s and in their early 30s who hasn't gotten that deep into it to really spend time at a startup. And one that has means, one that's scaling, one that has good product market fit, and particularly getting in at that sort of first 200 employee level, and spending at least the time to get to 2,000 employees, 3,000 employees, and kind of experiencing that whole curve. I think there's nothing better in terms of just staying right on the cusp of where the technology is. Budget efficiency, a lot of wasn't the case during the pandemic. Now we're in budget efficiency mode. There's a lot of lessons to learn in there. It's going to be called growth, most likely, but something around that role, I think, is the future of, what's going to be producing the CMOs of the next 10 years and possibly 20. It's those kinds of experiences. That would be my piece of advice. My story would be funny experience.
I'm on the edge of my seat. Let's hear it, Jason.
I had a funny experience at Uber, which was we had to negotiate. I ran Nevada during my tenure there, and launching and scaling up that market to the first couple $1 billion. And the experience. One of the places we got stuck, we had a little bit of a challenge with the airport, and generally we had a data challenge around that. We had, sort of Travis and his personality and sort of his desire to just absolutely keep everyone out of our data and, not always working with sort of public entities in the ways that were really helpful. And I actually managed to get an agreement, which was he basically stopped showing up to the meetings to boycott the decision. But the decision was we were blocked at Homeland Security in Las Vegas Airport, and we were trying to figure out a way to share enough data that they wouldn't block us from the airport. And what we ended up doing was agreeing that we would pass driver's license plates to authorities. And these were part of the anti-terrorism measures and everything. But the crazy part of it was just the dynamic of, for anyone who's been out there and your boss is giving you I'm not going to agree, but I'm also no longer going to go to the meetings. And there, by the way, is the doghouse. That was an experience that I had in Uber. And I had a lot of positive experiences. That was one that was a little bit more on the border.
All right.
Borderline.
Well, I think that's a great way to end the show. Thank you, Jason. And thanks to everyone for listening to CMO Confidential. Look for more of our shows on the I Hear Everything Network, Spotify, Apple, and YouTube, which include an operations-trained CEO dishes on what he really thinks about marketing. Is AI an extinction event for agencies? Marketing, the battle between believers and non-believers, parts 1, 2, and 3, and Tales from the Marketing Crypt. If you're enjoying the show, please hit the like button and subscribe. Hey, all you marketers, stay safe out there. This is Mike Linton signing off for CMO Confidential.